Folks call me Earl McKenna. Been married to the sea for more of my life than I was to my dear Clara, and that's saying something. Out here, where the sky bleeds into the water, you learn the world doesn't run on clocks, calendars. It runs on time, on the color of on the feeling in your bones. It tells you a squall is coming, long barometer does. These hands have hauled more nets than I can count, and these eyes have seen things that would make a city man think he'd lost his mind. But the sea, well, the sea keeps its secrets, most of them anyway. The day it happened began with a stillness. It was all wrong. The sea is never truly still. It breathes, it sighs, it shifts in its sleep. But that morning, it was holding its breath. I'd pushed my old trawler, the Sea Serpent, a name my boy gave her when he was 5 and it just stuck, out of the harbor before the sun had even bothered to show its face. The water was like polished slate, reflecting a sky the color of a faded bruise. My dog, Buddy, a scruffy mutt with more sense than most men I've known, stood on the bow, his nose twitching. He didn't bark. He just whined, a low, nervous sound in the back of his throat. That should have been my first warning. Then came the fog, not the usual morning mist that burns off by 9. This was nothing else. It rolled in off the open water, not like a cloud, but like a solid, moving wall. One minute, I could see the distant shoreline, a familiar dark line against the pale dawn. The next, the world shrank to a circle of gray water, the fogs thick and wet, tasting salt and damp wool, and it swallowed sound. The chug of my diesel engine, usually a comfort, sounded muffled and lonely, as if it were the last sound on earth. We chugged along for maybe an hour, me trusting my compass, and the years etched into the lines on my face more than any modern gadget. Buddy stayed close, his warm body pressed against my leg. It was in that profound silence, broken only by the engine, gentle lap of water against that I saw a shape. A shadow darker than the surrounding gray, looming dead ahead. First thought, freighter, lost in the murk. I cut the engine, and the silence that rushed in was deafening. I grabbed my air horn and gave it a long, hard blast, a sound that should have ripped through the fog for a mile. Nothing came back, not a horn, not an engine, not a human voice. The shape just motionless. As the Sea Serpent drifted closer, the fog thinned just enough to reveal its form. It wasn't a freighter. It was a research vessel, sleek and modern, all white paint and sharp angles. It looked like a creature from another world compared to my rust-streaked, battle-worn trawler. Painted on its bow in crisp black letters was the name Odyssey. I circled it slowly. It was maybe 150 feet long, big enough for a decent-sized crew, but there were no lights on, no smoke from its stack, no figures on the deck. The only sign of life was a string of scientific buoys tethered to its stern, bobbing gently in the flat water. I hailed it on the radio. "This is the trawler Sea Serpent hailing the vessel Odyssey. Do you copy?" "Over." Static. I tried again and again. The silence on the other end was more unnerving, a cry for help. A boat like that shouldn't be silent. It should be humming with the life of generators, computers, and people. This was a dead silence, a tomb-like quiet that clung to its white hull like algae. The mariner's code is a simple thing, an unwritten law older than any nation. You don't leave a vessel in distress, and the Odyssey, for all its modern sheen, was clearly in distress. The boarding ladder was down, swaying just inches above the water, an open invitation. It was as if someone had just used it and forgotten to pull it up. Buddy whined again, a clear protest this time, but I patted his head. "Stay, boy. I'll be right back." Tying the Sea Serpent to that ladder felt like tying myself to a ghost. The cold steel of the rungs bit into my calloused hands as I climbed. The moment my boots hit the deck, a chill went through me that had nothing to do with the damp air. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. The deck was clean, the ropes were coiled neatly, and a half-full coffee mug sat on a winch, a thin film of condensation on its side, as if its owner had set it down just moments ago. But there was no one. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and foreign, oppressive quiet. "Anyone aboard?" My only answer, faint, mournful cry of a distant gull, a sound that seemed to come from another world. I walked the length of the deck, my footsteps I peered into the mess hall through a porthole. Inside, a game of chess was laid out on a table, a white knight poised a black pawn, a jacket was slung over the chair. A plate with the remains of a sandwich sat next to the board. It was a scene frozen in time, a photograph of a life that simply evaporated. The bridge was my next stop. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open with a sense of dread, like I was opening a coffin. The inside was a temple of modern technology. Screens were dark, but the air still held the faint electric smell of running equipment. Charts were spread out on the main console, marked with grease pencil notation. I leaned over the ship's log, a heavy leather-bound book left open on the captain's desk. The handwriting was neat, professional. The last few entries spoke of studying a sub-oceanic acoustic anomaly. The final entry was dated 2 days prior. It read, "Day 14. The anomaly is stronger than ever. Graham is getting spooked. Says it's affecting his instruments. Fiona thinks it's biological, but I've never heard of anything like it. The sound is, it's not a sound. It's a..." That was it. The sentence just stopped, the pen trailing off in a faint, jagged line across the page. A feeling like cold seawater trickled down my spine. I scanned the darkened consoles, the array of dead screens and silent radios. Then I saw it, tucked away in a corner, mounted on a small tripod, and aimed out the main viewport. Small, black action camera. It was the kind those young adventurers used to film themselves doing foolish things. But this one was different. On its tiny face, a single pinprick of red light was blinking, faintly, steadily, recording. The battery must have been nearly dead, but somehow it was still alive. A silent electronic witness on a ship of ghosts. I stood there for what felt like an eternity. The blinking red light, the only heartbeat on the entire vessel. My hand trembled slightly as I reached out. The plastic was cold and slick with sea spray. My fingers closed around it, and with a soft click, detached it from its mount. It felt impossibly heavy in my palm, heavy with the weight of the story I'd held. Clutching the small camera, I left the bridge, closing the door softly behind me, if not to wake the dead. I didn't look back at the chess game or the coffee. I just wanted off the ship. Back on the Sea Serpent, Buddy greeted me with frantic licks and a wagging tail, his anxiety a mirror of my own. I untied the line, and as I pulled away, the fog seemed to thicken again, greedily swallowing the Odyssey until it was nothing more than a ghost of a memory. But it was no memory. In my pocket, the small camera was cold reality, its silent, blinking eye now a secret I carried alone. Getting back to my little cabin on the shore felt like coming up for air after being held under for too long. The Sea Serpent was moored, her lines creaking a familiar lullaby against the dock. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke, old books, the faint, briny scent that clung to my clothes like a second skin. Buddy, seeming to understand that our strange day was over, curled up on his warm rug by the hearth, letting out a heavy sigh. But for me, the day's work was just beginning. On my worn oak table, next to a chipped ceramic mug and a stack of tide charts, the little black camera sat like a piece of polished obsidian. It felt alien in my home, a shard of a cold modern world dropped into my fortress of wood and memory. For a long while, I just looked at it. A part of me, the part that had survived 50 years at sea by listening to its gut, screamed at me to take it back out on the water and give it a proper burial at the bottom of the ocean. Let the sea keep its story. Another part, the stubborn, curious part of me that always needed to know what was just over the horizon, wouldn't let it go. This wasn't just a story. It was people, soul. A ship doesn't just become a ghost. A reason. With hands that felt thick and clumsy, I found the right cable and plugged the camera into my old laptop. The machine whirred and complained. After a moment, the screen blinked, and a folder of video files. There were dozens of them labeled by date. I took a deep breath, the way a man does before he dives into cold, dark water, and clicked on the first one. The digital ghost flickered to life. The scene was bright, the sun high in a cloudless sky. The camera was mounted on the bridge, just as I'd found it, offering a wide view of the deck. A young man, with a captain's confident smile and bright, optimistic eyes, stood at the helm. He looked at the camera and grinned. Captain Owen reporting, "Day 1 of the expedition. Spirits are high, the sea is calm, and we're on course for the anomaly. Say hello, team." The camera panned. A woman with fiery red hair tied back in a practical knot was leaning over a railing, adjusting some piece of equipment. This must be Fiona. She looked up, and her face broke into a smile that was pure, unadulterated joy. She loved this life. You could see it in the way she moved. He looked. "We're going to find something amazing out here. I can feel it," she said, her voice full of energy. Then there was an older man, his face a roadmap of sun and skepticism, poring over a chart. "Graham," he grunted without looking up. "Just another dead zone on the ocean floor, Fiona. Don't get your hopes up." But there was no malice in his voice, just the tired pragmatism of a man who'd seen it all. I watched them for hours, file after file. I saw them work, laugh, and eat together. I saw Fiona's excitement as her deep-sea sensors picked up the first traces of the anomaly. I saw Owen's steady leadership, his easy confidence a balm for the isolation of the open ocean. I even saw Graham crack a smile during a particularly beautiful sunset. They were a good crew, competent, alive. I felt like I knew them, and a dull ache started to form in my chest. The shift began around day 10. The footage became less about the work and more about the anomaly itself. The first sign of trouble was subtle, a conversation between Owen and Graham, their voices low and tense. "It's not geological," Graham, his finger tapping a series of squiggly lines on a monitor. "These frequencies, they're patterned, almost melodic. It's setting my teeth on edge." "It's just deep-sea resonance, Graham," Owen countered, but his usual confidence strained. "We're just tired." By day 12, no one was smiling. The footage showed them gathered around the speakers, listening, but there was nothing to hear. The audio on the recording was just the low hum of the ship and the distant wash of the wave. Yet they were all reacting to something. Fiona's eyes were wide, her expression one of rapt fascination. "It's a song," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Can't you hear it? It's beautiful." Graham had his hands pressed over his ears. "Beautiful. It's a drill boring into my skull. We need to turn this ship around, Owen. Now." Owen stood between them, his face pale. He seemed torn, his gaze fixed on the empty stretch of water beyond the viewport. "We can't leave," he said, his voice flat. "Not yet. We're too close." The camera, in its silent objectivity, recorded their descent. They stopped eating regular meals. They barely slept. Their conversations became fragmented, paranoid whispers. Graham accused Fiona of hiding data. Fiona accused him of trying to sabotage the mission. Owen just stared out to sea, a strange, placid look on his face, as if he were listening to a conversation no one else could hear. The happy, vibrant crew I'd met in the first videos were gone, replaced by haunted strangers trapped in a floating piece of steel. Then I came to the timestamp. It was recorded 2 nights before I found it. The image was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of the bridge's instrument. The camera had been moved. Someone had taken it from its tripod, was holding it. The view was shaky, pointed towards the bow. Owen, Fiona, and Graham were all there, standing by the railing, their backs to the camera. They were silhouetted against a starless, ink-black sky. They weren't fighting anymore. They were perfectly still, standing shoulder to shoulder, looking down into the water. The only sound, the wind, a low, mournful whistle through the ship's rigging. The person holding the camera walked forward, the footsteps slow and deliberate. The lens moved past Graham, past Fiona, until it was focused on Owen, the captain. He turned his head slightly, and for a heart-stopping second, his eyes looked directly into the camera. They were empty, not of fear, not of sadness, but of everything. All the life, the ambition, the optimism I'd seen before. It had been scoured out of. "It's time," he said, his voice a monotone whisper that the wind almost stole away. "It's calling for us." He didn't look at the others. He just placed his hands on the railing and with a calm, fluid motion vaulted over the side. There was no scream, no hesitation, just a soft splash in the darkness below, a sound that was swallowed almost instantly by the vastness of the ocean. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wanted to look away, to shut the laptop, but I was frozen. Fiona was next. She turned, and a faint, serene smile touched her lips. She looked like a pilgrim reaching a sacred shrine. "So beautiful," she breathed, and then she followed her captain into the abyss. Finally, there was only Graham, skeptic, the man who had fought it. He stood trembling for a long moment. He looked down at the dark, then up at the empty, as if searching for an answer. He let out a long, shuddering sigh, a sound of utter defeat. "All right," he mumbled to no one. "I hear you." And he too was gone. The camera stayed pointed at the empty railing. For a full minute, nothing happened. The wind howled. The boat rocked gently. Then the camera turned, showing the empty deck before being placed back on its tripod on the bridge. The last thing recorded was the view out the main viewport, an endless expanse of black water under a black sky. The red recording light in the corner of the frame blinked and blinked, a lonely, fading pulse, until the screen went black. I sat back in my chair, the silence of my cabin crushing weight. The fire had died down to glowing embers. Buddy had crept over and rested his head on my knee, whining. The warmth of his body was the only thing that was real. I hadn't watched recording. I had borne witness. I had seen the unseeable, heard the echoes of a song meant only for the lost. And I understood. They hadn't been driven mad. They had been seduced. The sea had whispered a promise to them, and they had answered its call. The camera held the truth, but it was a truth no one would ever believe. It was a truth that felt dangerous, an ancient secret that had surfaced only to drag 3 souls down with it. And now that secret was sitting on my table. The laptop screen had long gone, but the images were burned onto the backs of my eyelids. I sat there in my cold, quiet cabin until the first timid fingers of dawn began to probe the darkness outside my window. The silence in the room wasn't empty anymore. It was crowded with the ghosts I'd invited in. Owen, Fiona, Graham. I knew their faces, their voices, the way they moved. I had watched them live, and I had watched them die. And now their story is my burden. Buddy rested his heavy head on my lap, his brown eyes looking up at me with a deep, knowing sorrow that only animals seemed to possess. He knew I was troubled. What was I to do? My first thought, a civic-minded one, was to call the Coast Guard, to hand over the camera and the location of the Odyssey and wash my hands of the whole affair. Let the men with uniforms and clipboards figure it out. But as I pictured it, the thought soured in my mouth. I saw the officials in their sterile rooms watching the footage with detached, analytical eyes. I heard their theories: hypoxia, acoustic delusion, a shared psychotic episode. They would give it a label, file a report, and the story would become a clinical footnote in a maritime journal. They would reduce the terrible, mesmerizing beauty of what happened to a mundane tragedy. They would never understand pull, the song, the surrender. The law of the land has no jurisdiction over the mysteries of the deep. To hand that camera over would be a betrayal, not just of the crew, but of the sea itself. No, this was a sea story, and it had to end by the sea's rules. By the time the sun was fully up, casting a pale, watery light over the harbor, My decision was made. I moved with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I filled a thermos with hot black coffee, grabbed a set of heavy tow lines, and headed back to the Sea Serpent. Buddy hopped aboard without hesitation, taking his place on the bow as if he knew we had unfinished business. Finding the Odyssey again wasn't hard. The fog had lifted, and it sat on the horizon like a white scar on the blue-gray water just where I had left it. It looked even more forlorn in the clear light of day, a pristine tomb adrift in the vast. Siding up to it was easier this time. The silence didn't feel menacing anymore. It felt respectful. I worked for over an hour, securing the heavy tow lines, my old muscles screaming in protest, towing the Odyssey, trying to pull a mountain. My little trawler's engine groaned, the hull shuddered, and the line stretched taut as steel bars. For a moment, I didn't think it would move. Then, with a deep, groaning shudder that seemed to travel up the rope and into my bones, the ghost began to follow. I didn't take it back toward the main channel. I took it north to a stretch of coastline sailors call the Boneyard. It's a treacherous place of jagged rocks and hidden reefs where the currents are a snarled mess. No one sails there on purpose. It's where the sea comes to claim what is hers. It took the rest of the day, a slow, arduous funeral procession of two boats. As evening approached, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep purple, I found the spot I was looking for, a small, hidden cove ringed by tall, dark cliffs. With the tide going out, I steered the massive vessel into the cove's narrow mouth. The sound was sickening, a long, grinding shriek of tortured metal as the Odyssey's hull met the rocks below. It listed heavily, its white deck canting at an unnatural angle, and settled with final shuddering sigh. There it would stay, a monument to its lost crew, slowly surrendering itself to the rust, the wave, a secret kept between the rock and the water. I cut the tow lines, and the Sea Serpent felt impossibly light as I pulled away. But my task wasn't finished. I still had the camera, which I kept in the pocket of my coat, a cold, hard weight against my chest. I steered my boat out, far from the shore, to a place I knew well, a place the charts called the Abyssal Plain, a spot where the ocean floor drops away into unfathomable blackness. I cut the engine. The only sounds were the gentle slap of waves against the hull and Buddy's soft breathing beside me. I took the camera out of my pocket and held it in my palm. It was just a piece of plastic and glass, but it felt like the heaviest thing in the world. It was a confession box with no priest to hear it, a final testament from three souls who had touched a mystery man was not meant to understand. I thought of Owen's confident smile, Fiona's joyful passion, and Graham's weary skepticism. They weren't victims. They were explorers right to the very end. They had followed their own Odyssey to its conclusion with a quiet prayer for them, a prayer only the sea would hear. I tossed the camera overboard. It didn't make a big splash, just a small, neat plink as it broke the surface. I watched for a second, a dark shape tumbling down, catching the last of the sun's light before the darkness took it. I was giving the sea back its voice, secret. As it vanished, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, not of relief, but of resolution. I go out on the water just like I always have. The Sea Serpent still chugs along, Buddy still stands his watch on the bow, and the tide still pulls at the shore. But something has changed inside me. Sometimes, when the engine is off and the world is quiet, I find myself listening, not for gulls or distant foghorns. I'm listening, silent, and I wonder, down in the crushing dark, if that little camera is still blinking its red light, a single secret heartbeat in the endless deep, recording the beautiful, terrible song that only the ocean knows. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved by humanity, but the deepest truths of nature are often beyond our understanding, and true wisdom lies in knowing what secret to leave undisturbed. The ocean is a patient collector of stories. If you want to hear more of the tales as shared with me, subscribe to my channel and join me on the tide.